Welcome to Mexico Matters, the CSIS podcast about how events occurring in Mexico can impact and, more importantly, matter in the United States. I am Mariana and Pedro, non-resident senior associate of the Americas program at CSIS and the former CEO of the Mexican Council on Foreign Relations, COMEXI. Brazil's protectionist economic model might actually serve as a vision for President Trump, as high tariffs, local content requirements, and many other non-market barriers have allowed Brazil to protect its manufacturing sector and jobs. But years of these policies have also lowered competitiveness, crippled innovation, and created a series of vested interests. To discuss the pros and the cons of these policies and how the trade war between the US and China is placing countries in the uncomfortable position of having to choose between the two biggest economies in the world and who might end up benefiting from all of this, that it is truly my pleasure to welcome Pedro Pullen Parente, a remarkable Brazilian public servant and businessman. Among the many jobs he has held, Pedro was Minister of Planning, Chief of Staff, Minister of Mines and Energy under President Cardoso, but he was also the CEO of Petrobras, he ran Bunge Brazil, and is currently the CEO of BRF, one of the world's largest food companies. Pedro, thank you so much for being in Mexico Matters. It's truly a pleasure to have you on the show today.
It's a pleasure for me as well.
Pedro, let me start by asking you to speak a bit about Brazil's economic model, which has long been characterized as protectionist with high tariffs. You also have local content requirements and various other market barriers. Is this a fair assessment?
Yes, it is a fair characterization, but I think it's fair to mention as well that we have been creating a number of costs and restrictions for the economic activity. For instance, the labor cost is too high, the indirect taxes, even for companies, but for consumers as well, are too high. So in one side, we do have a protection for industries, but in the other side, the cost to produce in Brazil is very high. So in order to be able to compete, not only because we want to protect the industry, but as well to allow them to compete, these tariffs are needed. Of course, we have a huge variety of tariffs here. I'm not saying that we would need at the level for at least some products, but I would say that if we have a 20% tariff, it would more or less compensate the higher costs we have to produce.
So tariffs are protecting a quite large industrial sector. Pedro, if my numbers are correct, about 22% of Brazil's GDP comes from manufacturing. And Brazil produces anything from cars to planes to pharmaceuticals to machinery, apparel. So on one side, this has really allowed you to keep some manufacturing jobs at home. But on the other side of the coin, productivity, competition, innovation are quite low and import prices are incredibly high. Would you say that this model offers a glimpse of President Trump's vision for America?
Well, we cannot be sure, but considering what he has been doing, it fits well. If we look at what is going on here and what he is doing, except by the fact that, his approach is sometimes very, very tough. Sometimes he applies, sometimes he takes the tariffs out. It's very disorganized. At least what we see and what we hear is that he wants to get the jobs back in the U.S. They want the industry in U.S. to be big again, talking only about the economic side of his policies.
Pedro, in balance, have these policies been good or bad for Brazil?
Well, I think that all considered, before the fact that we have not so far been able to reduce the cost of production, this has been the way we could stand with the high cost we have. In this sense, it has been good for Brazil. It has been the best for Brazil? No, it's not the best for Brazil. It has been good, but it's not the best. The best for Brazil would be, let's say, to have a more broad approach to the economy, to fix the distortions that we have. We have many, as mentioned. And then by doing that, we would be able to reduce the tariffs and to reduce the consumer prices for Brazilians. Because at the end of the day, we are talking about, let's say, that consumers are going to pay a higher price. They are paying here in Brazil and they will pay in the US.
Is it true that the price of an iPhone is twice as high in Brazil than it is in the US? Are they assembled in Brazil?
It can be 3 times what we would pay in New York before the tariffs. And I know that now, if it is electronic products, you would not pay for the tariffs. It's very confusing because changes every day. But yes, the cost of an electronic good in Brazil, it can be 2 to 3 times higher than what we would pay in New York in the normal days, let me put this way.
But Pedro, if we agree that part of Trump's tariffs aim to bring investments and production back to the US, do you think that by imposing 145% tariffs on China, 10% on the rest of the world, 25% on steel and aluminum, etc., can this goal be accomplished?
Let's make a distinction between the China situation and the rest of the world. Because when we are talking about a 10% tariff, I think that this would be, in my view, easily accommodate in a small reduction of margins, a small increase in prices, and this would work well. Of course, when we are talking about the tariffs for China, it's no longer 145. It can be, as I have read recently, as higher than 200%. Well, it doesn't matter. The Chinese has said 140 or 200, 300 make no difference, practical difference at all. But the main issue for me is not the level of the tariffs, is the uncertainties. How could you attract investments if you don't know what will be the role that will prevail tomorrow or the day after tomorrow? So I would say that the economic world is in a standstill position. Wait and see. It's very difficult even to, let's say, to make your current manufacturing unit producing because you don't know how much you're going to pay for the raw material. Talk about investing something that you will get, you're depending on the industry, but 2, 3, 4 years ahead of us. So I don't see that people would take decisions to invest in the US until we have settled down the situation and see that it is stabilized in a level that we would really stimulate the investments.
No doubt, Pedro. Uncertainty has certainly caused and is continuing to cause so much damage. What do you think is the end goal? Is the US trying to isolate China and negotiate deals with the other countries by forcing them to pick sides? But in reality, the reality is that countries from Southeast Asia to Latin America and elsewhere, they have China as their number one trading partner, right? And they don't really want to be forced to choose between the two largest economies in the world. What, in your view, is likely to happen between the US and China?
I think it's just a feeling that at the end of the day, they will get along because one depends on each other. The issue is the fact that considering the sovereign feelings, no one of the two wants to make the first step, to stand hand in hand.
No, and China cannot be humiliated, nor for external audiences, nor for their own population. We're talking about the Middle Kingdom.
And Mariana, there is a fact here that we cannot forget. The Chinese civilization is a civilization of 5,000 years. And without any disregard to the American culture and civilization, because what they have been doing, what they did and they still do is amazing, but they have, let's say, 260, 70 years. So I think the time perspective for the Chinese is different. This is my impression. They may feel that they can wait longer time.
Yeah, until the next president of the United States.
Yes, and they have huge reserves. And there is another aspect which is very, very important, which is for countries like China, for countries in the Middle East, and so on. One policy which is very important is the food safety. And in fact, and I'm sure this is something that is in the mind of many people. In fact, they have, let's say, alternatives to the US to supply them with food, including Brazil. And Brazil has been making a remarkable job in increasing the productivity and technology in the field. So our productivity is already compared to the US and Argentina, and of course some places, but as usual. But not considering the fact that Brazil needs a lot of fertilizers to produce. It's a very high cost, and we import 85% of the fertilizers.
From where?
From Morocco, we used to import from Russia. I'm not so sure if we continue or not. Canada, they are very important producers of NPK, which you know is the base for any fertilizer. We were able to incorporate the central part of the country, the so-called cerrados, because of the use of fertilizers, and then the productivity in these lands are very, very, very high, and the farmers are very, very big, which increases the productivity.
Pedro, ironically, President Lula recently criticized President Trump's protectionist policies, and he wants to take advantage of this opportunity. With Brazil's food productivity as high, will he be able to increase market share? I mean, I know he was in Japan recently, and he will travel to China soon. Some analysts have predicted that America's inward turn could actually result in a better relationship among countries that today supply the United States and have better relationships, more trade deals. What are your views about this?
Well, I think that one needs to be very smart in a situation where, in economic terms, you are not big enough to, let's say, to be someone too important for one side or for the other side. I think the best position for Brazil in these circumstances is have a very low profile. Why? Exactly because if we don't need to bother the Americans by making, let's say, stronger and showing strong relationships with other countries, especially China, because that's natural that it will happen without making efforts for that. So, in my view, I would just say, well, we hope you get along. And what we want to do is to sell our products, and we do that according to international prices because those are commodities. Of course, if suddenly we do not have the U.S. Supplying China, but we cannot increase the production of Brazil instantly.
Could Brazil increase food production at all?
Well, you know that in spite of all the things they say about the environment in Brazil, we have one of the toughest laws in terms of the use of land in the world. All owners of land, they need to preserve part of their land according to this law, which can be as high as 80% if you're talking about land in the Amazon, or 20% if you're talking about Cerrado, and 50% in other areas I cannot recall now. So I don't see that we would have available land ready to immediately be planted and produce. although we have, I would say, almost 300,000 hectares of degraded land and pastures that can be used, but not immediately. We would need to prepare this land. It takes time. So the idea that Brazil can immediately increase in a substantial way its production is not realistic. What I'm saying is that probably you are going to see a relocation of supply. Brazil would supply China, but US would supply the countries that we supply today, that we would be, transferring the export to China. And of course, this is a matter of price. The Brazilian farmers, they will not decide to export to China unless it's a good price. And again, we are talking about commodities. Commodities, as you know, there is no single producer or importer that can fix the price.
Pedro, I was reading that a Chinese delegation will be traveling to Brazil soon to discuss the possibility of building a train between Brazil and the mega port in Peru that they also built. From the outside, it was portrayed as a great opportunity for Brazil to have access to the Pacific. What can you tell us about this project? Is it even possible?
Well, I can be wrong, but I see this very, very difficult because from Brazil, from the producing areas from Brazil to Peru, it's a long way. You have, depending on how do you reach, this port. If you go through Chile, then you have the Andes to. If you go northwards, you have the Amazon forest. I don't see this is easy. And if it is possible, I don't see this done in short term.
Right. It would be a long-term project, yeah.
A long-term project. Well, am I in favor? Well, I'm someone that believes in the economic efficiency. So let's see at what price. Of course, there are geopolitical aspects, and of course, if the Chinese are investing, and of course, this could make Americans a little bit nervous about, and so on. But as I said, it's a long shot.
Considering everything that is happening in Latin America, for example, in Panama, I agree. I really don't think the Americans will be very happy to see the Chinese build a railway between Brazil and Peru. Pedro, going back to something you said earlier about the reordering of suppliers, we can see that other countries that have been slapped with tariffs recently, such as Europe or the Middle East, are also looking for new trade deals or new suppliers. Could this moment be an opportunity for Brazil to address some of its own structural challenges? And if so, what will it take?
Well, I think that it's much more a task that it is internal to the country in the sense that we have to improve the business environment. We have to improve the business environment through a huge number of small measures to facilitate the life of the business community. We are talking about, for instance, the public offices, public services, and don't as Mexico, we have three levels of government. The bureaucracy is too high, and corruption is a problem, as we all know. Every time you have a bureaucracy, a new rule, a prohibition, you are creating difficulties for the business environment and opening opportunities for corruption.
Latin America was known for its crony capitalism. Well, unfortunately, one of the consequences of imposing tariffs to some and carve-outs to others is that in the US, we will also be picking winners and losers, as we have been doing for years in our countries.
Exactly. So I don't see any magic solution, instant solution like that we could make Brazil the paradise of production of goods that could be exported to other countries. No, I don't see that this would work like that. We have a task job, a very hard job internally. We need to face that. And I don't see that governments in Brazil, I'm talking about the federal government, some states more than others, and municipalities, but especially the federal government. I don't see that they are concerned, really concerned about the need to facilitate, to improve the business environment in the country. It could be done. It's not that difficult. It's difficult, but not that difficult. But the concerns here are much more linked to parochial interests than the real national interests.
This is really interesting, Pedro, because you speak about the inability or the unwillingness of the government to improve the business environment. I have observed that Brazil also has a thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem, certainly much bigger than the rest of Latin America. I mean, you have 13,000 startups, around 20 unicorns. Do you think they will be able to break some of these barriers? Could they be the answer to such a great task?
Well, I think that they are basically exceptions to justify the rule, that we do not have a very good business environment. So this is, let's say, specific opportunities that these entrepreneurs, that you're right, we have very good ones. We could be growing at a much higher rate. And this is another problem we have. We do not have savings enough to grow in a faster rate. And
Brazil has been growing at what, 2% on average?
Between 2 and 3. And there is another issue here, Mariana, which is the interest rate.
It's so high. I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
Yes, the issue is we do not see, for instance, the capital markets working in Brazil. We do not have an IPO for years now. So the private equity industry is suffering a lot because, we do not have the alternative of listing companies as an alternative to strategic buyers. And no one wants to put money to work in longer term because if you can have the money working and you can have liquidity, you can have safety, and you can have very nice interest rates. Why would you freeze your money for 2, 3, 4, 5 years?
Right. Why would you risk it as an entrepreneur if I can make 15% in the bond market, right?
Yeah, with all the security of treasury papers.
There is a presidential election coming up next year, right? Who are the alternatives? And do you expect that the election might have an impact on the currency, the real?
I see that the reforms that were made in the economic area since the real, which was back in 1994, 30 years ago, which includes not at the same time, but as they are considered the same package. We have the exchange rate floating, and we have inflation targets for the central bank. I think this framework is very solid. And we have to consider that the new generations in Brazil, the generations that have not lived with inflation, they are the vast majority of the Brazilian population now. I don't see that we could have a risk for the real that would derail the real until next election. Yes, we could see, a devaluation, but as long as we see a stable government that is ready to make the needed fiscal measures and so on, it will come back. It's really a floating exchange rate. But going to the core of your question, well, the issue is we do not see alternatives now in Brazil. We see Bolsonaro, that, by the way, has passed through a very difficult surgery the day before yesterday because of his problem he had with an attempt to kill him during his campaign. The perspective is again Bolsonaro, if he is pardoned of the attempt to have a coup in Brazil to derail the government, and the other side Lula. And we know already what they will do if Lula is reelected, or if Bolsonaro is re-elected. Not
Can Lula be re-elected? I mean, that is
yes.
because he came back, then he can be re-elected. Okay, got it.
He can. He says he will run. I don't like either way to run public business in Brazil, neither Bolsonaro nor Lula and the DPT.
Right, and no alternatives.
Well, not yet. We have now the governor of São Paulo, Tarcísio de Freitas, who is a very good public manager, has made a very good career in the public sector, who is now, as I said, running the state of São Paulo. He's very good, but he is loyal to Bolsonaro. I don't see, I have seen people saying that he would not run for a national campaign if he has, as he has the São Paulo re-election at his hand, not very difficult.
What would be your base scenario, Pedro? Do you think Brazil, all in all, will end up being a beneficiary of this reordering of suppliers in the world?
I see that Brazil would benefit from this circumstance. I don't see that it would benefit as much as people are saying. I cannot see that for any country this situation of uncertainty is good.
Right. It freezes up investment, as you were saying. And
I really don't see that any country can be happy to what is going on. And of course, not only in relation to the recent developments coming from the new president in the US, but as well considering the wars that we cannot see them being solved in the short term, very difficult situation in the Middle East, Ukraine and Russia. So I'm a little bit pessimistic about the overall environment. The whole idea of a world that would cooperate, countries cooperating to each other and having the goodwill to help each other to see the general order that was created after the Second World War with very tough, very strong institutions like the United Nations, the IMF, the World Bank, and so on. That is now completely disregarded by governments. So I think that what we have at risk is a challenge for this model that can be destroyed. And I have heard that if we are to replace a paradigm, you need a new one in place. I don't see a new one paradigm in place.
We haven't come up with one yet, I agree. Pedro, unfortunately, we have come to the end of our episode, and I cannot thank you enough for this interesting conversation, particularly because, as you know, we always focus on Mexico and its relationship with the United States. But I thought Brazil is such an important player, not only in Latin America, but in the world, and how you're going to be managing your relationships between China, the United States, Europe, and Latin America, that you will probably be a role model for others to follow.
Thank you, Mariana. It was a pleasure. As we said at the beginning, it was really good. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please come back. You're always invited.
Thank you, Mariana.
If you enjoyed this podcast, check out our larger suite of CSIS podcasts. From Into Africa, The Asia Chessboard, China Power, AIDS 2020, The Trade Guys, Smart Women, Smart Power, and more. You can listen to them all on major streaming platforms like iTunes and Spotify. Visit csis.org/podcasts to see our full catalog